This is House Planning Help episode 278. Hello, I'm Ben Adam-Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. And coming up in this session, my guest is Geoff Stow. We've got the first in a few episodes aimed at beginners. So if that's you, it's early days. Perhaps you're just toying with the idea of a self-build. What we're hoping to do today is to give you an overview of what that process is all about. Tell it as it is, the highs and the lows. And Geoff's quite interesting as well, because he was one of the original self-builders at Walter's Way. And this is Walter Siegel that we're talking about, who had his approach to self-build. And this community was exemplifying that, really. And so Geoff has been on this trail for a little while. We're going to hear more in a moment. But I thought we often start off the podcast by sharing a resource or telling a story that is trying to hammer home a point, or maybe it's even just an observation. So today there's quite a good video made all about this specific project, Walter's Way, in central London. And this is by the Architecture Foundation. So we'll embed that into the show notes and you can go and check it out. So let's get to the interview then. I started by asking Geoff to tell me a little bit about his background.
Yeah, my background is nothing to do with building at all. I got involved, I worked in a community arts project in South London years and years and years ago. And one of the things we did was make a video with a group of self-builders. And we made a video to promote the idea of the scheme, which was then later remade by the BBC. And then when Lewisham decided to do a second scheme, I put my name down. We lived in a fairly bad council accommodation. Put my name down to join the second group, and I was the chair of that group. And basically, we built our own house on a Walter Siegel scheme. So we built the house entirely in a group of 13 people. And then there was a scheme for young homeless people in Peckham that they were setting up, and they wanted someone who could work with young people, and I had kind of community work experience. So I site managed a scheme for 9 young people building their own houses, and then went on to site manage a couple of other group self-build schemes, one with the Hedgehog scheme in Brighton. So my background isn't as a builder really, but I think in some ways that's quite interesting because it's actually coming at it as a novice. So I'm kind of sympathetic with people that are trying to get a scheme off the ground or a house off the ground.
Well, in some ways, I feel that too, that I'm always trying to talk about it and to share knowledge from different people. So this is exciting. I thought today would be really interesting just to set the scene. I'm looking to do a couple of episodes aimed at beginners and wanted this to be the first step. It's a big point, Geoff. So if you could just maybe start us off with an overview really of self-build and what we might do in our first hours, our first day, thinking, is this a good idea?
Right. First of all, I think most people, certainly on the group schemes I've done, I'd just like to say that most people find it much harder than they're expecting. But I've never met anyone who says, I wish I hadn't done it in the end. But it's a very, very hard process. And what I find really annoying about the whole thing is it seems to be geared up to failing. Everything you do is hard. And there's almost nothing that seems to be set up to make life easy for you. So all the things at the beginning, like the planning and finding how you connect the services up and all of that, it seems to be geared against you actually succeeding. And so people get very bogged down in all that. So I think the time you've got before you start building, people get really stuck on kind of sketching out plans for their houses before they've even got a site. And then I think what you should do is actually use that time to really research and understand the issues on everything. So, find out about planning permission, finding out about environmental things, so understanding insulation and ventilation and those sort of things. Going to the good exhibitions where you can actually talk to suppliers and find out the issues around windows and, again, insulation and underfloor heating and heat pumps and relevant different types of heating systems. So you really understand everything. So when you're talking to suppliers and other builders and things, you can talk their language, and that I think makes life a lot easier. And also you've got to kind of understand what the issue is and understand whether what they're selling you actually makes any sense at all. Because half the time it's just someone who doesn't even know what they're doing trying to sell you something, especially at the exhibitions or if you talk to a supplier or something. But the other thing is just your personal organisation. So understand things like VAT and setting up an accounting system. The amount of people I've spoken to that have kind of got a third of the way through and still don't really understand the issue around VAT claiming. and they've got no bookkeeping system. So they've got actually no idea whether they're on budget or not, because they just keep spending money and then suddenly find that the money's gone wrong and they've got a self-built mortgage and they can't free up the next lot of money. And the scheme is falling apart in front of them. And then they're phoning family saying, can you lend me some money to get through to the next stage? So I think that kind of level of pre-organisation before you actually got the site, just understanding what the issues are. And there is, a lot of self-build books around. Not all of them are particularly good. There's famous like the Mark Brinkley's Self-Built Home Builder's Bible. But there's several others as well, and you can get them for next to nothing on eBay. I haven't read them all, but they've all got good tips and something you hadn't thought of before. So if you kind of just spend the time going through them, reading bits and understanding what the issues are, you can work out how you're going to run your scheme. That's how you're going to organise it. Do you think you're competent enough to site manage it yourself, which is incredibly difficult. Planning timings and things like that, keeping in touch with suppliers is very difficult. But if you think you can do it, then you need to understand what the issues are. And things like health and safety now is involved in self-build, which puts a lot of people off. In fact, it's not a very big issue, but you need to understand it properly. And I follow a couple of same as you, I follow a couple of the Facebook groups, and I'm quite amazed sometimes that the people seem to be quite a long way into the scheme, and the naivety of the questions they're answering. You think you should have sorted that one out long ago. We've just had the floor laid and we're thinking, should we put underfloor heating in? You think you should have probably thought of that a while ago, The other thing I think people don't do, and I pick up a lot on the Facebook type groups, is that they seem to be reluctant to use their suppliers enough. They just ask for information, which the supplier should supply you with. And if the supplier isn't prepared to send you that information, then don't use that supplier. Things like windows. If you've got good triple glazed windows, you've been through all this yourself. Contact the company and say, I want to know exactly how these windows fit into my wall structure. This is my wall design. Where will I put the windows? What's the best way of fitting them? I've seen some where people have just done, spent a fortune on windows, and then they've been so badly installed that they're next to useless. Because the window installer just always we only ever put windows in with spray foam.
Well, you've mentioned quite a lot there. Let's just focus on that initial period, because it's a funny one. If you have land, maybe there is far more pressure for you to rush the research stage. But what is a decent research period that's not too short, not too long, and covers enough depth?
I would think something like a year. It very much depends on your skill base and other things and your level of organisation. When I've done the advice at the Home Building and Renovating Show, some people are just so organised. There's a couple of couples that I've met a couple of times at those exhibitions that will go to Home Building and Renovating Show for 3 days. They'll book into a hotel and they will go to every supplier of windows and talk with them in depth, and then go back to them and say, this other company said this, and really, really get to understand the issues. But the other things is things like just really understanding your site. I've seen lots of people do sketching the ideal house, and then that's what they want, and then the site actually doesn't suit that house. It's the wrong way around and things, and actually just getting trying to work out the way that your house is going to sit on that site to get the best out of the house and the site, which can be relatively easy or can be a nightmare if you've got your south-facing view is onto a sewage works and the north is onto the Pennines or something. How do you place your windows? So, how do you get the best out of both of those things? So understanding the site, spending time on the site, seeing where the sun is in different areas, so that you think in the evening the sun will shine through that window. That takes time to really understand the site. And at the same time, you can be going to the exhibitions and going to talks and, if there's any visits, if you're involved in things like Passive House, going on some of these Passive House visits, and use that time to kind of really research. Get someone, if you can't do it, setting up an account systems and things like that. Go on courses and get information. But my guess is that there's probably a year's work in getting to really understand all that and being very confident when you're talking to people.
Is there a danger that in your research you almost focus too much on the bits that you find interesting?
And that's always going to happen, isn't it? And I say all these things, and it's a lot of do as I say and not as I do, because you can't not sit there sketching your ideal house. Everyone is going to be doing that and looking at house going, that's what we want. I love that window. I love that staircase. I want one of those staircases and things. Just they get involved in all of that. I think the thing is probably to concentrate on the stuff that you're not interested in. like the VAT and setting up an accounts package, working out how you're going to do costings. And the other one that really baffles me is that people use companies say, how much is it going to cost me to build a 3-bedroom house in Hereford or something? And they want someone to just give them a figure. And you say, well, I've seen on Grand Designs that it costs so much, and my house isn't anywhere near as good as that. And I always say you can't do it. You've got to base those costs on real figures. You can't do it on the idea that someone has said, oh, I did it for £900 a square metre or £2,000 a square metre or whatever, because you never know what's included in those costs and what's not. And then if you don't do it, someone said, I built this lovely house, £1,400 a square metre, and then you don't do it, you feel like you failed. And it may be because the site had much more complicated issues. You don't know what's on those costings. So getting costings actually based on some kind of reality, which is incredibly difficult and tends to fall apart as soon as you start digging foundations. But the programs on TV, I watch those and think there's no way you built that house for that money. So what's not included in that? Did you include the architect's fees and other things? It's really difficult to tell.
So looking at the whole process, what are the key decisions that you're going to be making?
I think for me personally, it's budget and performance, I think, is like actually having a sensible budget for your project, not trying to think, with a bit of luck, I can pull it in for this, because the odds are you very, very rarely hear people say, I brought it in, under budget and ahead of time. It's comparatively rare. Well, I've never actually heard anyone say it. But so things generally cost more than you think. And the other thing is just the fabric of the building, really concentrating on getting that side of things right, getting to understand about insulation and windows and detailing of doors and things like that, so that your fabric of your building is really good. Because, again, I've never heard anyone say, I wish I bought cheaper windows or put less insulation in my house. That doesn't happen. And it may mean that when you're doing your build, you don't get the dream kitchen straight away. But does it really matter? You can always retrofit another kitchen a bit later. You can put a perfectly serviceable kitchen in for a couple of £1,000. And a bit later on, when you've got a bit more money, you can put in your dream kitchen. Going back to think, I'll put more insulation in afterwards is just a nightmare. And if you bought cheap windows and doors or cheap heating systems, it's just always a waste of money. So it's really understanding the fabric of your build and getting that to the best quality you can afford and trying to have a sensible budget. And the other one is, as a friend of mine doing, is that, it is possible to think about not building the whole house in one go. If you're very limited budget, you can, a friend's doing this in Northumberland. He just built quite a small house. And then, once he's done that, he'll go on and build the second stage. So it doesn't necessarily be the perfect house straight away.
Who is going to be helping us on this journey? Are there common themes that you always get this person, or does it just vary from project to project?
I think some suppliers that I've spoken to, I think, are very good. They will help you a lot. I keep referring back to windows because that's one of the big things. And if you watch Grand Designs, it's always the window that causes the problems. But actually, good window suppliers can be, really good on their detailing and understand that. And, good builders merchants. When I've had the group schemes, specified I want something, and you go to the supplier and he says, well, actually, you've specified that, but that, I can get you exactly the same thing, but not from a named company for half the price. So you can get a bit of advice like that. Or do you know this product or something like that? Because you don't know all the products that are around. A lot of the Facebook groups are very good. I mean, the two that I follow, you get some really good responses. Seems to be a lot around planning issues and things, but a lot of people have been through it and have got really good information. Like all that sort of stuff, you've got to filter out the rubbish. And there are people that, whatever your question is, they'll come back saying, well, my company does a really good underfloor heating system, no matter what the question is. but there is a lot of solid information out there and a lot of experience, and people are willing to share it. The problem is once they move in, they tend to stop sharing because they're kind of so exhausted they don't talk about it anymore.
Let's just focus on key issues and get a few comments from you. So you've talked about budget. What would be your top budgeting tips?
I think, as I said before, is try as much as possible to base it on real costs. So actually spend time looking at the costs of things. The Mark Brinkley book's quite good on that. There's lots of different sort of things where you can start budgeting. But it is very difficult. So certainly my experience from talking to people is that where possible, budget high for all the initial stages. Once you get above ground, it's relatively easy to, well, not relatively easy, but it's possible to price up the build. The problem is actually things like foundations and services and access roads. Those costs can really change, and it depends. If you're in a rural area, you might find that there's a spring or something like that which you didn't know about, just thought the land was always slightly damp. In city sites, you're using a reclaimed piece of land or something, it might have pollution. The site in Brighton, we had to pay for a slow worm consultant to fly in from Liverpool, which is just ludicrous, to move to 3 slow worms they found on site. So, and that cost us, cost someone an arm and a leg. We had to translocate 5 plants, which we moved through Brighton on a special lorry. And they died. But so there's so many unknowns in those early stages. So when you're looking at your costings, certainly be very generous about the costs of your initial stages of foundations and things. So, add a good, once you get your quotes in, add a good contingency on that, because that will free up money later. Because the two things on your budgeting are, there's the actual overall cost of the building. But if you've got a self-build mortgage, then there's the actual cash flow side, that you could actually have enough money in the scheme, but because you haven't finished one stage, they won't release the money for the next stage. So the scheme sort of dies if you can't borrow money off your parents or something. That accounting and keeping an eye on things is really important.
On the topic of finance, what are the different ways that people finance their projects?
Largely, it's a mixture between having some money and a self-built mortgage. That would be the majority. Because of I do things at Central Alternative Technology and places like that, it tends to be people that are a bit more kind of on the fringe. So they will often do things like, say, build a small house and do it mortgage free. So they just build it as they go along and then, extend the building later. But the majority of people, I think, will be doing a mix between having some money and a mortgage. The only change that I think is there is a kind of biggish market of people who are retired or coming up for retirement that are sitting in a big, cold, drafty house and, basically can free up all that money to have a new house built that's energy efficient and hasn't got staircases everywhere. And that seems to be quite a large area of the market now, whereas it used to be much more kind of young families.
Land next, and it's obviously a massive factor in building a house. How have you got some of your group build land? Has that been easier?
Well, the schemes that I wasn't involved in land acquisition because that scheme was run through the local housing associations. So the scheme in Peckham was actually, I think they got really badly scammed by the council because they sold them a piece of land at quite a reasonable price for the houses, and then announced that the retaining wall was unsafe and it was against a major road and it needed to be rebuilt, and that the site had been used as a car scrapyard, so we had to, I think, take a metre of topsoil off and replace it with new soil. So they actually got rid of a very dodgy piece of land and made the housing association pay a fortune to kind of make it up to usable standard. And the scheme in Brighton, actually, a couple of the self-builders who'd been involved as travellers knew about this little bit of land on the back of a council estate. I think they'd had caravans on there at different times, and the local kids used to use it to race stolen motorbikes around and things. So they just knew about that piece of land. But generally, I think that obviously the land and the planning permission are the two major issues. And I run courses at CAT, and a couple of times people have said, "Well, I bought land, and then I'm going to hope to get planning permission." You think, you won't get planning permission. You can't even have access. One person bought a piece of land where there was no chance of them even getting access to it, let alone planning permission. What I do think is surprising is that small developers haven't latched onto a market of selling service plots. I've spoken to people about it, and I think that'd be a really good little earner. Just basically you can get planning permission and run in services and access roads and sell it off like that. You haven't got all the building problems, and they would sell like hotcakes because you just think that's all that side I don't want to deal with and I'm scared about. I've done schemes, and the idea of trying to sort that out is terrifying, as you probably know.
Yeah, I think you're certainly on something that I'm interested in for the future and believe, or perhaps there's something that we don't know about, but it certainly seems a logical thing. What other routes would you suggest for people to search for the land in the first place? How do they know where to get this land from?
Well, there's all the standard ones that you go. There's all the estate agents and things like that. But two or three people I know, I think a lot of it is actually knowing your area. So I think it's much easier to find land, living, or you regularly go to the area where you want to be. And so, the friend of mine in Northumberland, he found it in a small village, and he was just chatting to people, I think in the pub or something, and they said, well, Bob round the corner used to have the little the builder's yard, and he's retired years ago, and it's all just sitting crumbling. And he went round and saw him, just agreed a price and bought this old builder's yard, and then applied permission to convert it into a house, and got the land at a reasonable price, and it was relatively simple. So there was that. But then, as I said, there's this standard way of doing it with all the estate agents and searching around. I think the problem with land in some ways is that some people have got very fixed ideas of what they want. So they say, well, we saw the land, but it was 2 miles to a school, and the shops weren't very nearby. I think basically you've got to be very flexible because there's not a lot of it around, and it's ridiculously expensive. I mean, just crazy money. And I think that's largely to do with programs like Grand Designs. There's a plot of land's just come up near me where I live in Exeter, and it's about half the size. I've got a 1970s bungalow now I bought, and the plot came up. It's about half the size of the plot, including my house, and they wanted more than my house is valued at. So someone's bought the plot, they built a house on it, it fills the plot, it almost touches all 4 walls of the plot, and it's just been sold for 890,000 quid. But there's no garden, it's just crazy. The big houses are being built on very small plots because the calculation used to be that the plot was worth a third of the final value of the property, which is roughly what that came out at. The market for someone who just wants to build a nice house for their family in a lot of areas just doesn't exist now. It's just gone.
Let's talk a little bit about build routes, because you do have different options in how you realise your project. So again, what are the common ones, and what should we be considering?
Well, the first one is that when I run the courses, I always say to people, there's no right way of doing it. The method you choose will be based on a whole lot of criteria. What there is a lot of wrong ways to do it. So basically whatever system you decide to go with, you want to get it the highest quality you can. You don't want to skimp on that. And then a lot of it might be just personal choice. And people will say, I don't want a timber frame building. I hate sort of plasterboard walls. I want, I like the idea of a solid stone or brick thing. And basically, if that's what you like, just go with it. If you don't want to build something that you're not going to be comfortable with afterwards. Personally, I would build timber frame. I like timber frame. I like the accuracy and the speed and things like that. But other people say, no, I don't like the idea of living in that. I want it built out of wood or straw bale or these other things. I mean, whatever building method you go with, you just need to really understand what the issues and the criteria are, and the good points and the bad points, and ignore what people say about their method is the best and it's modern, or it's developed by NASA or something ridiculous. But actually just understand what the issues are with all of them and base it on real costs and mix and match. I would, out of personal choice, tend to avoid very innovative systems by very small companies, because it's whether they can actually deliver. Because you do hear stories about people, when new systems come around, when SIPs first started coming out, there was quite a few cases where people gave the money up to the company and the company went down because they just weren't big enough to handle the orders they were doing. So, and then there's the other thing is just like, what sort of products do you want? Some people just are into performance. So, high performance polyisocyanate, foam insulations. And other people say, no, I want it as natural as possible. And they're looking at sheep's wool or warm cell type insulations and things like that. So just, I think it's about personal choice, but whatever you do, you want it to the highest standard you can get it.
And thinking about us as the client, or maybe not necessarily the client, what are the range of things that we can do in the project? We can just stay the client, but you mentioned project management earlier. We could actually build the thing if we felt confident. How do know ourselves?
Well, you say you've got a choice. There is a system where you basically don't do anything. All you do is just shell out huge amounts of money to a building company, and then one day they say we're finished and you can move in, and that's an option. And the other option is that the other extreme is you do nearly everything yourself. Most people, I imagine, is somewhere in between that. And a lot of it, you've just got to think, what your skills are. And not always, I think it's a common thing, is not to assume that because you can do it yourself, you'll save money, because time is money. So if a job that a skilled person can do quickly and well, and you can do fairly well and take a long time over, that might mean that it's longer before you move in. You've got more mortgage repayments, you've got more insurance. If you're renting a house, there's the rent that you're paying while you're doing it. So you might think you're saving some money, but actually, are you really? And also, if you're taking a long time to do a fairly simple job, are you holding up the next skill? So basically, the electricians can't come in because you're still laying joists or something, or building stud walls inside the building. So there's that sort of thing. So you've got to decide really if you're going to be involved in it yourself. Are you up to the job, and are you going to hold other people up? And the other option then is just to either you project manage the scheme yourself, which obviously can save you money if you feel you can handle it. Just dealing with all the different suppliers, find a subcontractor for each job, or that you employ someone to project manage this whole scheme for you and get them to do it. But obviously that costs more, but they've got very high amounts of skill, and it's not to be underestimated, the skills you need to kind of keep the thing on track and on budget, and when to know to chivvy people up, and going out and getting prices for subcontractors and making sure the work's done to the right standard, and that they're doing health and safety properly while they're on site, and not causing trouble on site, upsetting the neighbours and all that sort of thing. So there's a range of options. I think you just basically got to do it on terms of what you can afford, what skills you have, and what your level of involvement is. I mean, you can be involved on a level which says, I will do certain things which isn't I'm not waiting for anyone else. So things like if you've got wooden cladding, you could be putting wooden cladding up yourself because no one's waiting for that job to be done, or you could be staining the cladding or getting involved in landscaping or something that's not on the schedule, it's not holding anybody up. But it is a kind of problem if you start doing jobs yourself and you're holding people up.
I'm just wondering about the common pitfalls of self-build. Do you see certain things coming up a lot?
Well, the main ones I've come up with is budgeting. People have just got really overambitious what they can do with their budget, and haven't got any control over their budget, so things start going wrong. And people just picking up on one thing and then becoming obsessed with it. I'm just a bit harsh, really, but there are people who say, whatever happens, I want to build with straw bale, and then you think, the site you've got, the house you want, is totally unsuitable for that. You should be just a bit more flexible. And things like heating system, people suddenly get involved in ground source heat pumps or something like that. And issues around heating, I think, are now incredibly complicated. It used to be relatively easy to kind of work out what you do, but I think with all the issues around now, I find it very hard. And it's why I'm, over the last few years, become more and more sympathetic to passive house, because it just seems like it does solve all those issues. Because up until 4 or 5 years ago, I'd generally recommend, if you had it, just build insulated and put gas heating in. But now gas is kind of a lot more dodgy. So it's just understanding, the issues around those sort of things, and not necessarily getting very fixated on one thing and end up kind of making your build really complicated because you've got this one fixed idea that you saw somewhere on television and you want. And whatever you do, someone will always say, I would never have done that if I were you. Because, whatever it is, there'll always be someone, especially in kind of environmental side, to look, they call that house environmental, I wouldn't touch it, But there is a lot of that around. But in the end, you make the decisions and you will make some mistakes. You always say afterwards, if I'd done it again, I wouldn't have done that. But you try and get as much right as you can based on the research and knowledge at the time.
What do you think about timescales then? Are there common timescales that you should expect, plan for, or are there just extremes?
Oh, that's really, really easy. You just always say, I want to be in by Christmas. And basically, that's the only criteria. You just, whatever it is, you just say, I want to be in by Christmas, even no matter what. It just seems like everyone always says that. If you're doing the work yourself, I think people should try and avoid doing 2 winters. I think 2 winters is a killer on site. Certainly on the group ones I did, the second winter was just misery. So, I think you should try and get into around about the 18 months. But between a year and 18 months seems like a good thing. And if you've got good builders, you're getting for less than that. But if you're doing a lot of work yourself and with family, then it seems to be that sort of time scale. if it gets on much longer, especially if you're living in caravans and things, people say a second winter in a caravan is a killer. But equally, I think people should try and avoid moving in before the house is pretty much finished. Because if you move in, it's really hard to kind of build when you're living in the house. If you actually go around quite a lot of self-built houses, you'll often find things like there's no skirting board behind the settee because that just didn't quite get done or something. But you don't want to be doing major work in the house if you're actually living in it because you've had to move in early just because money's run out or you can't stand the caravan or something. So actually trying to get that schedule right so that you can actually get in a reasonable amount of time, I think is quite important. And if it means coughing up a bit more money to get really good speedy contractors, do it. But, other people just say, I don't care, basically it takes what it takes. And I'm quite happy with that. But if you've got a family and kids and things, I think that's pushing it. How long did yours take?
Well, it depends what you call the beginning, because the initial outset...
I'm talking about from the moment they start digging foundations.
Oh, really. No, it was very quick, 9 months.
Yeah.
But then that's as you say, the advantage. We paid for a good tractor and that they know what they're doing. They push everything forwards. And to be honest, you're quite busy enough making decisions. It's not as if we thought, we've done nothing in this. We were quite heavily involved. It's just the thinking side of it.
Mm. I mean, the other one that comes up quite a lot is that people keep changing their minds during the build, which everyone always says is a really bad idea, trying to move walls or thinking I should have put a window there or something like that. Those sort of things, when you actually do it, try and firm things up and then basically go with it. You make minor changes, but you don't want to be making major changes once you actually got people on site building.
Is there anything else we're aiming this at beginners day one that you feel should be in this episode? There's no point repeating anything, but anything else in the fundamentals?
No, I don't think so. I just think, as I said, just basically read up, go to exhibitions, go to places, talk to people, take notes. And the other one, I think, if you're employing anyone like an architect, is just the old thing about just compiling a scrapbook. So that, basically, that if you go to talk to an architect or a designer, you can show them the sort of house and the buildings you like. So they've got some idea where you're coming from. Because the story is always that basically architects only ever design the same house over and over again, really. So if they've got a history of, steel and glass, and you want a kind of little straw bale rammed earth building or something like that, they're not going to be the right architect. So you got to find an architect or a designer that can design the sort of thing you want. And I generally think, although it's not necessary, you don't have to employ an architect, but I do think if you find a good architect that's sympathetic to your ideas, they can make a better house than you can. You can buy a program and draw up the plans yourself, but architects just add that wow factor that make the house really good rather than just a series of rooms joined up by a corridor. They can generally improve your design. So actually get that, even if you just, say, can I employ an architect for a day just to look at my plans and tweak them to make them better. But that's their skill,
Yeah, they should have learned that over years. And the early stages of hiring an architect are not that extortionate, really, either. That's the other thing. It's just when you go into the detail.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how much you want to employ them for. I mean, you can just employ an architect, say, can I, pay you for a morning just to look at my plans and talk through some ideas with me, or right through to a thing where you can say, basically I want to to sort my plans out, get my planning permission, get building control, see the thing through and sign it off at the end. And they'll either do it as a percentage or a fee for doing that. What you need to do if you are thinking about working with architects is to talk to several people and only work with an architect you think is basically on your wavelength. So things like sustainability, no architect is going to say, I don't do sustainable building, but you need proof they really do understand the issues, because I've seen so much junk, just really awful detailing and things. But the architect will say, basically it's really energy efficient because it's complies with current building regulations or something. So if you want that sort of stuff, you've got to feel it's someone you can work with and sympathetic.
Well, Geoff, I've really enjoyed getting you onto the podcast after all these years, so thanks for helping us today.
Okay, nice to speak to you.
Head online to take a look at the show notes for this session, houseplanninghelp.com/2 HPH278, where you can review the main information once again in the summary that we provide. We've got a few photos, including Geoff's house on Walters Way and the various other projects that he's helped and the courses and so on. Geoff also mentioned the Facebook group, where he's actually in one of our Facebook groups. So if you'd like to be part of that too, we'll put a link into today's show notes and you can come and say hello as well. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, again, scroll down to the bottom of the show notes. That's always the way to do it. You'll see the place right there. houseplanninghelp.com/278. Let's slot in an iTunes review. We haven't done one for a little while, and this one comes from Stateside. The name here, it's difficult to turn that into a name when it looks more like a secret code, but the title of this review is Underrated Subject and Podcast. And remember, these reviews don't have to be long. This is just a sentence, but it's a sentence that I much enjoy. Essential listening for anyone interested in energy-efficient housing. The host is a joy. There we go. Yeah, getting that in as well. So if you'd like to leave us an iTunes review, you can head into the directory and there's a rate section, but that will just help others find us and enjoy these podcasts too. It'd be much appreciated. Also, if this is your first episode today, perhaps you thought, oh, beginners, this sounds right for me. Just remember something that we do at House Planning Help is we also run a membership community called The Hub. And this is what we're really hoping for. People who are coming in day one, who want to be shown the ropes. Well, we've got loads of information, loads of videos, loads of courses, a community as well that you can join there. If you want to have a look at what digital resources are available to help you, check out houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, Lee Fordham from Archetype is my guest as we look at building terminology. So you're a beginner, but you don't want to look like a beginner. You've got to know and understand all of this. So there'll be a test at the end of that one, no doubt. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.